For years, fans believed they were watching one of the strongest partnerships in television, but what if that image wasn't the full story? According to a recent insider claim, something may have shifted behind the scenes between Heughan and Caitríona Balfe, and not in a small, forgettable way. The two stars of Outlander built their reputation on an almost effortless chemistry, one that felt authentic, consistent, and deeply connected. But now, that same dynamic is being quietly questioned, not by fans, but by someone who claims to have seen what happens when the cameras stop rolling. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Their interviews were still polished, their appearances still coordinated, and their on-screen performances remained as powerful as ever. To the audience, everything looked exactly as it always had, but insiders suggest that what appeared unchanged externally may have been slowly evolving behind the scenes in ways that weren't immediately visible. It didn't happen overnight. Instead, the shift, if it truly existed, was gradual. Small changes in interaction, subtle differences in tone, moments that might have gone unnoticed at the time but now seem more significant when viewed in hindsight. According to the source, there were periods during filming when their communication felt more structured, less spontaneous, as if something unspoken had altered the natural rhythm they once shared. Those details, while not dramatic on their own, begin to form a different picture when placed together. Because what fans often interpret as chemistry is built on countless small interactions, eye contact, timing, ease of conversation, mutual responsiveness. When those elements change, even slightly, the overall dynamic can feel different, even if the performance itself remains strong. And that's exactly what the insider hinted at, a shift not in professionalism, but in the underlying ease between them. That distinction matters. There was no mention of conflict, no dramatic confrontation, no single event that could explain everything. Instead, it was described as a gradual cooling, a change that became noticeable only over time. And in an environment as intense and demanding as a long-running production, even small changes can carry weight. The more fans revisit past interviews, the more these subtle differences start to stand out. Moments where conversations feel more controlled than natural, where humor doesn't flow quite as easily, where responses seem carefully measured rather than instinctive. None of these moments confirm anything on their own, but together, they create a sense that something may have shifted beneath the surface. And that's where speculation begins to take hold. Some believe it could be the result of external pressure, the expectations of a global audience, the responsibility of maintaining a certain image, the strain of working closely with the same person for years. Others suggest that the intensity of the roles themselves may have blurred boundaries at some point, requiring a conscious effort to reset and redefine those boundaries moving forward. Both explanations feel plausible. Because maintaining a consistent dynamic over such a long period is not simple, especially when that dynamic is constantly observed, analyzed, and interpreted by millions. What begins as natural connection can evolve, adapt, or even distance itself as circumstances change. But what makes this situation particularly compelling is the absence of confirmation. Neither Heughan nor Caitríona Balfe has addressed these claims directly. There have been no statements, no clarifications, no attempts to reshape the narrative. Their silence leaves space for interpretation, for analysis, and for the kind of questions that don't have immediate answers. And in that space, the story grows. Because when something that once felt certain begins to feel uncertain, even slightly, it changes how everything is perceived. The same moments, the same interactions, the same scenes, viewed through a different lens, can take on entirely new meaning. Which brings everything back to one central question. If the chemistry that defined them hasn't disappeared, but has simply changed, what does that change actually mean? If that shift was real, then the next question becomes unavoidable: what could have caused it? Because in long-running productions like Outlander, relationships don't exist in isolation. They are shaped by schedules, expectations, creative direction, and the constant pressure of delivering something meaningful to a global audience. When two actors work together for years, especially in emotionally intense roles, the connection between them is bound to evolve, whether gradually or suddenly. According to the same insider perspective, the change wasn't rooted in a single disagreement or dramatic fallout. Instead, it was described as something more complex, something that built over time through repeated exposure to high-pressure situations. Long shooting days, emotionally demanding scenes, and the need to maintain consistency in performance can create an environment where even the strongest working dynamics are tested. And that's where the idea of distance begins to make sense. Not as a sign of conflict, but as a response. When two people are required to sustain a certain level of intensity in their performances, especially in scenes that demand emotional vulnerability, creating boundaries off-camera can become necessary. It's a way of protecting both the work and the individuals involved, ensuring that the line between character and reality remains clear enough to function. But boundaries, once introduced, can change the dynamic. What once felt effortless can start to feel more structured. Interactions that were previously spontaneous may become more measured, not because the connection has disappeared, but because it has been consciously adjusted. And over time, that adjustment can be perceived from the outside as distance, even if it serves a practical purpose internally. That perspective aligns with what some fans have started to notice. Moments where Heughan and Caitríona Balfe appear more reserved during interviews, where their exchanges feel slightly more controlled, where the ease that once defined their interactions seems to have shifted into something quieter. It's not a dramatic change, but it's noticeable enough to raise questions. And yet, their performances remain unaffected. On screen, the intensity is still there. The emotional connection between their characters continues to feel authentic, even powerful. If anything, it suggests that whatever adjustments have been made behind the scenes have not weakened the work, but perhaps strengthened the professionalism required to sustain it. That contrast is what makes the situation so intriguing. Because it challenges the assumption that off-screen dynamics directly mirror on-screen chemistry. It shows that two actors can adapt their personal interactions while still delivering performances that feel deeply connected. And in doing so, it adds a layer of complexity to how audiences interpret what they see. At the same time, another possibility remains. That what is being perceived as distance is not a shift at all, but a natural evolution. Over time, people change, priorities shift, and working relationships mature. What begins as an open, expressive dynamic may gradually become more grounded, more contained, not out of necessity, but as a result of growth. If that's the case, then the insider's observation might not indicate tension, but transition. A movement from one phase of collaboration to another, where the connection still exists, but expresses itself differently. Less visibly, perhaps, but no less effectively. And when viewed from that angle, the narrative shifts from one of conflict to one of adaptation. Still, the absence of direct clarification keeps the conversation open. Without confirmation, every detail becomes subject to interpretation. A pause in an interview can be seen as hesitation or simply reflection. A more measured response can be read as distance or as professionalism. The same moment can carry different meanings depending on the perspective of the viewer. And that's where the role of speculation becomes significant. Because once a narrative begins to form, it tends to shape how new information is understood. Fans don't just observe, they interpret, connect, and construct meaning based on patterns they believe they see. In doing so, they become part of the story itself, contributing to the way it evolves over time. In the end, what we're left with isn't a confirmed fallout or a clear explanation. It's a series of observations, a set of possibilities, and a dynamic that may be more nuanced than it first appears. Whether the relationship between Heughan and Caitríona Balfe has truly changed, or whether it has simply evolved in ways that are less visible, remains an open question. But perhaps that's what keeps people watching. Not just the story on screen, but the one that seems to exist just beyond it, quietly unfolding, shaped by perception, and never fully explained.